suits, we always wonder whether you're a bit corporate. Okay, so they're going to give you 28 minutes, like 28 minutes. It's like,
Like they cut the time.
wow. I mean, so you must have really interesting things to say. Okay, microphone check, Paloma.
Yeah?
Okay, microphone check.
Okay.
Yeah,
Giovanni?
hello.
Hello.
Jeff?
Hello. And hello.
Okay, I'm running away. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Round of applause, please, for everyone. Yay! Come on, guys. Stop reading your phones, okay? Stop reading your phones. Listen to these people.
You can tweet if you want. So hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. And we have a panel that is called ScaleUps. We are going to talk about hypergrowth, and I have great news because we have here people from different geographies, so you are going to learn in a very short period of time, even shorter than was in the program, from scale-ups everywhere around the globe. So, well, I'm going to introduce very briefly our panelists today, and I will ask you, please, to complement the definition. So, we have Giovanni. He comes from London, and he's the principal at Frog Capital. Frog invests in software-enabled scale-up stage tech companies in Europe.
Yes, thank you very much, and great to be here. I'm a principal at Frog based in London, and we invest in scale-up company across Europe in software and in internet businesses. I am personally responsible for the deal origination primarily in the UK and kind of technically head of Spain as well, so everything Spain related kind of goes through me at the company. And I've been there for about 3 years, coming from a background in M&A at JP Morgan, so always been working in TMT, and I actually studied in Spain at ESADE, so very proud to be back.
Okay, and we also have Jeff. Jeff Karras is a venture capital professional with experience in technology, operations, marketing, and finance, including more than 18 years investing in early to expansion stage technology companies. He comes straight from Silicon Valley. So, Jeff, if you can tell us a bit more.
Yeah, hi, everybody. So I was one of those guys that started off technical coding, building systems, did that for a number of years. Then went to Sun Microsystems, helped start a division there, and then jumped into the venture capital world in 2001, which was certainly an interesting time. But anyway, I've been with three funds, three venture firms and several funds underneath that. And recently a new firm called Alter Venture Partners. I'm based in San Francisco. I've got a partner who's based in Lisbon, and we're focused on early stage enterprise companies. Doing typically that means Series A or Series B rather than seed, but we'll certainly do seed. But we're mostly focused on the U.S.-based companies.
Okay, and we also have Nicolas Iordanov, principal at Iris Capital. He's responsible for latest stage investments in France and Europe with a key expertise in software and B2C. So please, Nicolas.
Yes, hello everybody. So I'm Nicolas. I've been in the VC industry for 10 years now, and I'm a principal at Iris Capital. We are basically a European VC fund. We have a strong DNA out of France and Germany with 2/3 of what we do that's over there. We're currently investing out of a 300 million fund, so we deploy tickets from 1 to 30 million, from Series A to Series C and growth companies later on. We have a strong expertise in B2B models and software models coming out of France, but also B2C companies. I won't mention any specifics apart from Virtuo, that is a full mobile-based car rental service that is launching into Madrid this week. So please check that out.
Okay, so we also have Cédric. He comes from Dublin, and he's, apart from being the sales director for growth in Indeed, he's the author of Jump, that is a framework for organizations to thrive in the age of disruption. So please tell us more.
Yes, hello. So I have 20 years experience in the tech industry. So starting up departments, organizations. I was 7 years in Russia scaling the business for NVIDIA. Now I'm scaling the business for Indeed in Dublin. With regards to my book, it is basically of having started as a sales book, how to increase sales performance, but in the end it meant that the entire organization needs to be nimble and agile to be successful, and that's why I wrote the book.
Okay, so I will introduce myself for sure. So I am Paloma, I'm the director of Wayra Madrid. Wayra is the most technological, global and connected hub all around the world. So we have 11 offices. We invest in projects that have to do with Telefonica, that is our mother. So I was happily part of the founding team of Wayra. That is one of the most amazing projects that I have been ever participating. So, well, the good news here is that we are talking about the scale-ups, and we have views from different perspectives because, well, I'm based in Spain, in Madrid. We have vision from London, from the Valley. We also have people from France and Dublin. So the first question that we were discussing before is, we are talking about the scale-ups, but what is a scale-up from your perspective? Is there any difference depending on the location? So Jeff, as you are the one that comes.
Yeah, so look, in terms of definition of scale up, there's the definition maybe what it should be, and maybe what it is. But let's start with, in general, look, a startup basically gets started, has an idea to disrupt something, and then basically starts doing a series of experiments that build upon each other, and then basically based on the success of those experiments, hopefully they continue on. Scaling up, in my mind, is, at least according to me, is when you're actually building upon the success of those past experiments and then starting to accelerate that path forward. But that's not necessarily always how it works, and sometimes, certainly in the Valley, I think people are guilty of actually starting to actually build before they actually start to have these experiments show success. And so we can talk about a little bit more of that later, but well,
okay.
any other?
Yeah,
I pretty much agree with the definition, but I would add a slight European touch, which is maybe that the transition between the early stage and the scale-up stage is really when you have demonstrated your model into your native country, and you're ready for international cross-European, for example, or from Europe to the US expansion. There is really a regional aspect to it, more in Europe, when you have to have demonstrated your model in your initial country before being ready to get outside of borders.
Maybe just adding one point, which is when we assess opportunities, we are very focused on the stage. So for us, really making sure that the businesses that we invest are at that scale-up phase, that's the priority. And for us, it's really about the business model and operation maturity. So, excuse me, for us is understanding is whether these businesses have developed predictable, repeatable sales processes, particularly if you're thinking about enterprise software on the enterprise software side. So I think it's, if you are in B2C business, does this business really understand their lead generation, their marketing, their CAC, the conversion? It means whether have they built something, basically, do they have a platform where I can put 10, 20 million and then scale up in a capital efficient way? So for us, that's often a key challenge, which basically is an operation challenge.
Okay, I don't know if you want to add anything. Okay, I think that we cover everything that could be. So, which are the main challenges for scale-ups? We are talking about hyper-growth companies. So, which are the main challenges from your point of view? I guess that one, what before that was internationalization. I don't know if you want to.
I think that there's another one which is obviously out of an organizational perspective, is the necessity for the CEO and the leadership of the company to transition what they're doing and to get from a very operational centered model, when in the early phases they have to get involved in all the aspects of the company and they have to be really hands-on the business. Entering into the scale-up phase, they have to take some distance towards those operations, and they have to work and spend time on structuring the company. And I'm sure we'll talk about recruitment and finding talent later on. That's obviously one big challenge. But you have also other challenges into anticipating future growth. And I think that relationship with investors is also another topic in which you have to get involved more deeply and more regularly. For example, if you look at of our portfolio, we pretty much never invest in companies that we meet for the first time. Or if you say differently, in all the companies pretty much that we've invested in, we have known the founders, we've known the companies for 1, 2, 3 years prior to that. So as a founder, you have to invest your time and energy into structuring your company and not only taking care of the operational day-to-day part of stuff.
So developing on top of that, about this CEO and this founder's dilemma, so have you seen in your portfolio companies a lot of cases where the founders have just hand over the company to a professional CEO?
Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective, for every company that I invest in, I look for a self-awareness in the CEO at the very beginning. And I think, everybody's different. Everybody has the ability to grow. Everybody has different skill sets. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to this question. But I think you need to make sure that when somebody is not the CEO that's done this 3 times before successfully, that they understand that they may max out, that their skill set may actually be at the earlier stage when it actually comes to generating an idea. And sometimes those guys just want to keep generating ideas. And there's other guys that come in and actually add more process and add some of the things that oftentimes the mindset of the early stage entrepreneur isn't necessarily the same mindset of the growth CEO. But again, I think having that self-awareness as to where you really are as a CEO and what your skill sets are, there's sort of this old adage: do you want to be basically the king, or do you want to be rich? And in some ways, it's you've got to it's hard to do sort of both of those sometimes, and you need to know when to step aside.
Okay, I love that. So, Giovanni, keeping this conversation about talent.
Yeah.
So it's not only the CEO, the profiles. When you are growing, how do you hire? What are the limitations that you have seen in?
Sure. Well, I think definitely as you scale up, I think particularly when we diligence or look at businesses, it's really about looking well beyond just the CEO or founder. So I think a business that has a kind of a very strong senior management team, it gives you a very good indication that the CEO, for example, is willing to delegate, step away from micromanaging, etc., etc. But as I said initially, I think for me, scale up is very much of an operational challenge. So it's particularly in Europe these days, I think, on the software side of things, recruiting very strong sales people, it's becoming much more of a challenge. Maybe people 10, 20 years ago would say strong tech developers, it's really what's very difficult to get. Maybe that's still true at the startup phase. I think for scale up, particularly in Europe, if you want to do enterprise software and SaaS, really having people that have done it and seen it on the sales and marketing side is definitely one where there is a lack overall. And the second one, which I think relates to talent, is maybe sometimes underestimated, is it's not just about finding people, it's about onboarding the people efficiently. Because when you're growing and you want to hire 50 people in the next 2 months, maybe you can find them, but if you don't have a process to onboard them very quickly and efficiently, they're going to waste a lot of time and money. And we have seen that often. For example, people that on the tech side, maybe they don't have the process documented. If your processes are not documented, people will come in and they don't know what to do. Same on the sales side. If you don't have a sales playbook, you can hire as many salespeople as you want, but you're not going to be effective in 3 months. So basically the productivity goes down and everything becomes more expensive. And so I think these are the specificity at the scale up that we try to look, and when we come in, we try to help.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Cédric, let's go back to you. What do you think which are the biggest challenges that you can?
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at, on the one hand, you have the senior leadership, and they might have the vision, but when you scale, you grow so fast that processes will constantly change. On the other hand, you have exactly the people that you need to add. So onboarding is spot on. With the right onboarding, what we do, we manage to get people up to speed between 3 to 6 months. If you don't have the right onboarding, it's going to be 6 to 12 months. And then when you talk about scaling, it means adding one amount of resource and getting 2 or 3 out of it, rather than purely growing, which is more serial. So getting people doing more and making more efficient is so crucial to become and profitable and become a high growth company. And this is where you really will make or break it as an organization. So onboarding is absolutely spot on.
So,
Yeah.
okay. So when preparing this conversation, Jeff, you suggested that we cover some of the cautions of scaling up a company that is not ready. Which are these factors? Which are the
Yeah, no, so look, I think the whole VC and startup dynamic actually creates some inherent challenges sometimes that everyone should be thinking about and aware of. And specifically, it's that when VCs are looking for a very specific type of company and growth and everything else, and every company wants to raise money anyway, that wants to be that fit, that paradigm. And so they essentially will build a model. That model will show the kind of growth that the VC wants to do. They put in money that assumes that kind of growth, and then the only way you can actually hit that kind of growth is to go hire a bunch of people, because you'll never hit that growth if you don't hire those people. But they've skipped this whole process that I was talking about earlier around these experiments and actually figuring out whether or not you have the right product, the right market, the right fit to those product and market. And when you have all these things that don't come together, and now you've actually quote unquote scaled up, you've actually just hired a bunch of people, and now you're realizing that something's not working, all you have is this mash of information, and it's really hard to dissect what's going wrong. So that's when companies start going into this hiring, firing, laying off, switching, pivoting, and all those things could have been avoided if they would have taken a little bit more time on the front end, as opposed to raising that large round and then trying to run and do something that the company wasn't ready for, or maybe the product wasn't ready for, the market wasn't ready for.
Okay, I love the sentence that you told me before about the.
No, I mean, look, in a sense, it's basically an educated leap of faith, and so you really want to take, each step of growth is basically going back and looking at, what you've learned from what you were doing before, but still, every stage of growth and every stage of funding and everything else, you're taking a leap of faith that you're going to be able to get to that next level.
And if I can add to this, once you have experimented, once you have your product, then you execute the hell out of it. No need to start adding more and more products until you have a certain bandwidth, a certain momentum with a product. So we are a multi-billion-dollar company, and until recently we only had one product, purely because of execution. Look at Microsoft, how they initially grew purely on execution.
Okay, so it's a question of focus. I like that approach. So, one of the challenges that we have been talking is internationalization. So I want to go back into that because, I guess that there is a main difference in that between the US and the rest of Europe and even Latin America. So we have a lot of founders today here, mostly from Spain and Latin America. From my perspective, I will, because we were talking before, I prefer that you develop that idea, Jeff.
Sure. So, I mean, look, I think it's a very different concept to think about a company in Europe versus a company in the US, because international it's a different conversation. I think international is likely to happen a lot faster, perhaps in Europe, but it's potentially more dangerous because of the fragmentation across the countries in Europe, which you guys can obviously talk about better than I can. But from the U.S. perspective, and by the way, just one other thing. So at my fund, one of the things that we do, and we talk about to U.S. companies, we try to help them accelerate growth. And we started thinking about how we can help them in Latin America, how we can help them in Europe, and how we can help them in Asia. And so that is one of the key differences that I think we bring to the table. So this is very core to us, but it's around the right kind of timing and the right kind of entry strategy and the right kind of partner when you go international from the U.S. perspective, given again that the U.S. has a large market to sell to. Israel, say, on the other hand, they don't have as much of a market, and they design their companies to actually go target outside of Israel from the very beginning. And so, it's very different, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I think the most important thing, broadly speaking, though, is that whenever you're kind of venturing outside of your core market, you do it in a way that you understand where you're going, you do it with partners that can help you, and you don't just sort of send somebody off randomly trying to go search in go knock on doors in a country that you know nothing about.
Okay, so
Sure.
from your perspective,
Yeah, sure. I think it's at least for the businesses that we look at primarily, for example, in the UK, kind of going to the US is often, I mean, these days I think is the most common kind of path, I would say, which again, I mean, our view is that it makes sense for some companies. We never pushed anyone to do it. Actually, we invested in businesses on the premise that they would not go because we thought it just didn't make sense at all. But maybe trying to keep it more Spanish specific. What I think is, or at least when I see businesses in Spain, I think there are lots of interesting businesses, but they are doing something very Spanish specific, oftentimes something that maybe has already been done in somewhere else in Europe, and then there is clearly a low-hanging opportunity in doing it in Spain, and then they obviously expanding mostly to Portugal, Italy, Southern Europe, which is great because the opportunity is there. But I think then it's a question whether I think it's important to think, are those countries kind of the most strategic? If I think about getting $1 of revenue from Italy and $1 of revenue from the UK, I think if you think about maybe 5-10 years down the line, eventually maybe someone would want to buy you. I think they typically value having UK client revenue more than Southern European, unfortunately. Also, I think it's a question of, it's very difficult from our perspective to assess whether a company is really doing something different, innovative, and is really winning if they have been maybe only kind of winning locally in a certain market. Because what if, for example, when they come to the UK, I mean, which is a more mature market, so having kind of cracked one of these difficult markets typically gives you like a huge competitive advantage and really validates your proposition. It's definitely more difficult. Not saying that everyone needs to do it, but I think it's important to think about strategically where is really kind of the strategic value going to come from, and go accordingly.
Okay, lack
That's
of ambition sometimes, you say. Okay, so please, Nicolas, have you ever invested in Spanish companies? What do they need, all of them in the audience, to get investment from from Irish?
I won't have spot-on advice for Spanish companies, as we have no Spanish companies in the portfolio today. But I know that getting international, having an angle, as you said, and getting your product local into the local ecosystem is really the first thing you should do. And that's the reason why at Iris we've opened 15 years back a second geography in Germany to really have a deeper knowledge of the network there and to really help the French companies get into Germany. Now we're doing that on the other way around. We've also opened 5 years back an investment strategy positions in the US and in Israel, which we leverage helping those companies outside of Europe get into Europe. So really active into building that understanding and those relationships into the geographies. And coming back to the talent, because I think that the success of a scale-up really relies on maybe 90% of the talent that they're able to attract. Today, we are all aware there's a lot of cash in the market, which is a good sign because the startups can have access to that financing, it can grow with the money, but which is also a bad sign because there is a lot of competition for that qualified talent. So I think that there is also an area in which the founders should invest more time and energy is in building and strengthening the company culture that they have. And having a strong company culture really helps attract that talent. And that's very often something we look deeply at when we go and meet the companies, we meet the management, we look at that culture that they're able to install and that will help them attract the talent. Because I think that at the end of the day, it's a people game. So we have to be very, very efficient and very precise on what you're doing on that end.
Yeah, and, culture is more than just having a ping pong table on the work floor. Culture is really what drives people to do something, and it drives motivation. And when you talk about culture, also talk about the purpose. What do you want to change with the company? And that's tremendously important to get the right people inside your company. And when you talk about the right people, to talk about the hiring needs that we often have when we scale up and internationalize, don't just hire for the language. You might, if you look for an English speaker and you outsource in Slovakia or whatever, you might have a Slovakian dentist that has nothing with your product, but he only has the English knowledge. So you really need to know what are the key attributes you want to hire for.
And maybe just to add one point on culture from a scale-up perspective, I think it's extremely challenging to grow very fast, particularly internationally, maintaining a consistent culture. I mean, we've seen companies, for example, where we invested that are growing very fast in the US now. And the question is, how can I ensure that these people joining from New York, I mean, how am I ensure that the culture remain consistent? So it becomes a challenge of the CEO having to move there more permanently, or going back and forth very often, or making sure that the US team or whatever team comes into the headquarter, maybe for the onboarding or frequently enough to kind of really get together. It's when you're scaling and adding lots of people very quickly, it's very easy to kind of lose this culture and finding yourself in a place where you basically, you kind of really can't recognize your kind of company culture anymore. So that's very difficult, I think, to do at the scale up.
And culture can actually be also toxic. At a certain moment, you have a culture, it goes well, and then you start with the groupthink, where you have dissident voices that might actually be very good for your organization, but that might be held back by the culture that is inside the organization. So you really need to be always challenge yourself and challenge your culture to be invigorating.
Okay, what I have seen from my experience is that a lot of companies here in Spain, they have like the change of momentum when they raise their first international VC fund, and this is something that sometimes does not happen. So I would love you to tell the audience some advice that you could give to them in order to raise the attention of an international round. So I will start with you, Nicolas, because I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that definitely proving that you have a strong footprint in Spain and that you have a solid go-to-market angle into other European countries would be a have to, and also that's where would like to click with you guys and see how we can help, and we can help to strengthen that insights and connections into those markets. So the maturity of the international project would be, I guess, key for us.
Yeah. Okay, maturity of international projects. So
yeah, same. So and focus. My experience is you cannot always focus on the big 3 European countries. Pick one big country and start testing in a smaller country, then get momentum there, and then start scaling up in the other countries.
Yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective, I think momentum is actually the best friend you've got when it comes to fundraising. And so, when you can actually start demonstrating that there's increasing velocity of sales, increasing velocity of product development, whatever the metric, whatever the focus, or whatever the stage you're at, if you can actually pull those things and show that that we are moving in a much faster pace, that's what helps people buy into that vision and get excited about it from the fundraising perspective.
Sure. Maybe the last point is maybe stating the obvious, but making sure. I think if you partner up with very strong local partners, investor or whatever, I think it's very important, because from our perspective, we are based in London. We don't have foot on the ground. When we come here, the way we come in is by basically meeting the local VCs, the people that we think are interesting and a good fit for us, and then lots of the deal flow and relationship comes through that. So I think if you can, start having relationship with those, they will help you really bridge to the international.
That's not that obvious here. So I will. We have run out of time. Hello. No, but I just wanted to say the final sentence because I love that part. Scaling up and growing is a leap of faith, but it should be based on experiments. It should be based on data. We always say in startups that cash is king, but data is queen. So if you do not have this data, the leap of faith would be just a leap of faith. So thank you a lot to these panelists. I hope that you enjoyed as much as I have.
Okay, thank you, Paloma. Thank you.